Thanks so much for having me. I was actually had a question for Paulogia, and I should say that I'm
Uh-oh.
a fan of your show, Paulogia, even though I'm a
Ooh.
Christian. I really do enjoy and appreciate your show
Well, thank you.
for sure. I do want to challenge one of your arguments, though, that I think is invalid.
Oh,
And
good. Yay.
my goal with this call is that you would agree that just this one argument is invalid and that you would stop using it. And the argument, which a lot of your followers will be familiar with, is when you say, "For the Bible tells me so," and you play the jingle.
Hmm.
So there's
Was
there's
That's
there's
awesome. Sorry.
there's oh, sorry, what's so funny?
No, just people getting angry at him about the jingle. I don't know if you know this, but Paula G and I live in the same house. So I hear a lot about people disliking the "For the Bible Tells Me So" ice cream truck jingle. So I was just
Anyway, I'm gonna
thinking that
let's
was
let
gonna be the
Will.
case. But yes, go ahead, Will. Sorry. I didn't mean to derail it. I'll mute myself.
No, no, no problem. So the first problem with the argument is that it assumes that the Bible is a single historical resource, which is not the case. The Bible is a collection of historical documents,
Do you
and
think that I'm unaware
using
of
the
that?
no, I think you are aware of it, but I want to connect the two together and make
Okay,
a
I'll let
case
you.
that it's an
Let,
invalid.
let, I'm also gonna not say anything, and you let me know when you want me to respond.
Okay, sounds great. So, and I'll make this quick, but the first problem is that the Bible is not a single resource, and so the argument make the listeners believe that it is, and so I think that's a problem. And the second problem is that the term Bible means different things to different people. So the Catholics have their own Bible, and they take a collection of ancient historical documents, and they say this collection is our Bible. The Protestants do the same, but it's different than the Catholics. The Jews have their own. You've got this movement called the King James only movement, and they've got their own. And so the reality is the Bible is comprised of different ancient historical documents, and referring to an ancient historical document as evidence that you believe something happened is actually a valid argument. So you want to respond to that?
Absolutely, I do. I'm very excited. So I have very strict criteria about when I will use "For the Bible Tells Me So," and that criteria is when the person who's putting forth an argument has a single source. I understand that, for example, Matthew, Mark, and Luke and John are separate documents written by separate people. However, I assume it sounds like you have great Bible knowledge and that you're aware of course, that oftentimes Matthew and Luke are copying directly from Mark. So sometimes, or you have Matthew and Luke that would go back to what some people call Q source, or we just don't know the source. But again, when those things are duplicated exactly, those are still single source. There's lots of those things. So I have a very strict criteria on my channel when I use "Where the Bible Tells Me So." It is only when I use it only when there is a single source. So if there's any multiple attestation across Bible books, I won't use it. I will only ever use it, and I would challenge anyone to watch one of my videos and find a place where I've used it where there is multiple attestation. Now, I don't have separate songs, and I didn't write the song. It was a Sunday school song. I don't have a separate song that "For Mark Tells Me So," or "For Paul Tells Me So," or "For John Tells Me So." I don't have separate songs for those. But would you agree that my complaint about being a single source, that the expression of "For the Bible Tells Me So" is a complaint that a person is using a single source? Does that seem reasonable?
Yes, I think it's reasonable. I understand where you're coming from, but I think even that's invalid. A single source is a valid argument to something
I'm not.
happening.
And you know what? That's totally up to the person watching my video to decide whether a single source. What I point out is when it is a single source. I'm not saying, because I don't think you'll ever catch me saying because it is single source that it is invalid. I point out when, and this is the thing that drives me crazy about Christians, they like to infer that they have lots of places where this happens, including my video today, for example, where Jeremiah wanted to say, for example, that the disciples were despondent we wanted to make some argument that this couldn't happen because the disciples were despondent. Well, how do we know that the disciples were despondent? We look and we find the passages, and those are in the Gospels, and there are not separate takes. They are actually still from the same source. They're all still go trace back to Mark, that there's despondence. And so I'm merely pointing out to the kind of Christian that I was that there's one source for that, that it's not corroborated anywhere else. I think you would have a point if I ever was saying because it's a single source, it's not valid. And I don't think,
Okay.
do you think that's what I've been doing?
Well, I think it comes across as you playing the jingle and your wording comes across as it's not that valid of an argument because you don't have something other than the Bible. And that's what I'm pushing back on.
Well, that you are catching the spirit of what I'm saying. Absolutely. Because I need to wake Christians up who probably haven't studied as much as you. And I was one of those people sitting in the pew who was listening to the Frank Turek's of the world and thinking, and the J. Warner Wallace's and the Lee Strobels that, oh, well, we're talking about all this stuff. And they talk about, there are so many secular sources that talk about Jesus, and they say these broad sweeping things, but it doesn't hold up except for in the Bible. So in my videos, I actually do want to use that jingle to shake people into checking the sources for themselves, because I get that it is a little piece of my audience's childhood that is coming back in a I picked up a haunting ice cream truck style to put that pebble in people's shoe to go investigate what sources they think they have for this. So the fact that you called and are complaining not about the actual argument, but about the tone of it and about what it might mean if people are uncareful, then I feel like you're validating my efforts.
Okay, give you something to think about, because
Okay.
I think if you painted this in a more honest light, I think it would be helpful for your audience. And so here's what I
I
mean
get
by
you
that.
use the word honest.
He's
You
not
use
being
the word honest.
dishonest. That is not
I d-
cool.
yeah, I do think you're an honest person, Paulogia, and that's actually why I'm calling, is I think you'll actually consider what I
You
have to
don't
say.
think it's dishonest, you think it's flippant, and there's a difference. You think it's flippant, you don't think it's dishonest based on what you just said, and there is a difference, so you shouldn't frame it as him being dishonest when you're just upset that he's flippant. Sorry, stopping
So
it.
I do want to hear what Will thinks so you use the word dishonest, and I take that word very seriously. So please tell me exactly what in that sentence, when you just called me less than honest, what specifically?
Okay, so what I think you're leaving out, which is crucial here, is that most of ancient history around the time period that we look at the events in the Bible as happening, most of those things that we talk about and put in history books and teach our kids have a single source. And so I think if we are to take your argument and apply it to the rest of ancient history, we pretty much have to throw everything out. And I'll give you an example. I
No,
recently discovered, and this
I
is
don't care. No example. If you're done with that point, then I want to respond because I
okay.
totally,
Yeah, please do.
like, my first response is I do not care how much ancient history we would have to throw out. Don't care. Doesn't matter to me at all. If Caesar didn't cross the Rubicon, my life doesn't change one bit. No law will change. None of my friends will have whether they can get married or not change. No one will be indoctrinated into believing that science is an evil. Do not care. So I didn't want an example because it's just, you're not going to get anywhere with me because I don't care how much of history is kept or not. That said, I absolutely agree that a lot of the things that even I put forth in my videos absolutely have single sources. Like, so for example, did Nero set fires, right? That's a great example, I think. Did Nero set fires to Jerusalem and scapegoat Christians? Totally one source for that. And I will normally point out when I talk about that Tacitus is our only source for that, because I don't want people to think that we have lots of sources for that and therefore should be confident. I think every time that any fact in history is put forth, and if it is being put forth in a way that is meaningful to someone's life, we should express how many sources we have for that. So it would not bother me one bit if every time some non-Christian bit of history was taught that we talked about how many sources we had for it. Fine. And because again, I'm never putting forth that a single source makes it invalid, but the number of sources we have should affect the confidence. And my endeavor here is to talk to Christians and say, how much confidence should you have? And multiple attestation, I think you would agree, is a reason to raise confidence, and single attestation is a reason to lower confidence.
Would you if we kind of went more big picture and instead of looking at events, but we looked at just the existence of individuals, would you doubt that an individual such as Nero existed if we only have a single source stating that he existed as a person?
Nero, I probably would, because he was purported to be a very important emperor who should have had coins and things like. So I guess it would depend on how much evidence I would expect for a certain people. So, but if you said like, hey, was there a guy named Phil the Butcher who worked in Miami in a certain year? Like, I wouldn't expect a lot of evidence for Phil the Butcher in Miami. Nero, I would expect for there to be more than a single source. Was that fair?
Yeah, but I do think we
Like I
do have
and so like I
significant
think Jesus
historical
existed.
people.
Like I'm totally on, like I don't know why we're going to who existed, because I think Jesus, I'm on your team if you think he existed. So
Okay. Yeah, I think that's great. And I think your response to my argument in general was consistent, that you're willing to challenge other secular history and even throw it out. But I do think, and it'd be cool if I could get someone like you to admit this, I do think if you read encyclopedias and if you read historical books and, things online, you will notice that they state things as historical fact if there's only a single source. And so there does seem to be a double standard when we're looking at Christianity and the Bible versus the other things that happen.
right, I wish that the phrase historical fact didn't exist and that it wasn't used. Frankly, so I roll my eyes when I hear the word historical fact or anything. The more historians that I've let enter my life, the more scholars who work in history, like all of them, they colloquially, even amongst themselves, will use historical fact. But if you press them on it for a second, it's like, what that historical fact, what do you think of the percentages? And they're like, oh, like 60%, and this is for like completely non-related Bible things it's just in that field, they use fact as a thing that they want to build on. It's like, you know what, this is more probable than not. And let's build on that now, because we'll try and, use that until we have new evidence that thinks it's probable. So I'm not impressed that an encyclopedia would use the word historical fact. And I don't think anyone should be, no matter. I'm saying this blanket of maybe it's something that completely supports an opinion I hold dear. That's fine. I still think it's a poor phrase to use.
That makes sense. And
I
do
don't know
you
if that,
think,
I don't know if
you
that makes you
know,
like me less or more.
no, it's great. Do you think encyclopedias and historical textbooks should point out when there's only a single source every single time that's the case?
I would be happy if they would. I understand that would be quite redundant a lot of the time, but I think as I read through more broadly, and this is a indictment of me and the kind of church environment that I grew up in. It very much discouraged studying these things on our own and just taking authority from the pulpit to be thing. But as I'm getting to enjoy history more and more, I am actually, if you know what you're looking for, you do notice that historians often give you their sources for it. And a lot of times when it is only one, I now pay more attention. I don't think it needs to be trumpeted, but I do think that apologists trade on ambiguity and they make stronger points than they should based on how many sources that they are pretending or that they're allowing their listeners to imagine that there is. And the fact that there's
Yeah.
4 gospels doesn't mean that we have 4 sources for Jesus's baptism. Because guess what? That all goes back to the same source.
Okay, so
Um,
just so I understand your argument, because I want to be clear here. When you say "for the Bible tells me so," you're saying that there's only one source inside of the Bible, or are you saying it's only in the Bible?
I
Like
use
for
it
like for
exclusively.
example,
Yeah, no, please give me an example that you think would make sense.
yeah. So Peter wrote some of the documents we have in the Bible, and Paul wrote some of the documents we have in the Bible. So if we have something once
Disagree,
in Peter
but
and once in Paul,
let's just
Watch
say that
Paul
there
have
are
a
books
stroke.
attributed to Peter and books attributed to Paul, and then we can continue on because I don't think Peter wrote anything.
okay, that's fine.
Just watched your
So,
feelings
yeah,
get hurt.
So
So no, like let's go for example. So boy, what's an example of something that's attributed across books?
just
Like let's say you're
let's
talking about
just say
example. So
one event is in one event is in a book we attribute to Peter. The same event is mentioned in a book we attribute to Paul. Would you say "for the Bible tells me so"?
I would not like, I can't think of a hypothetical with that particular combination right now because those are epistles and they didn't talk about events that much. But I absolutely would not. I would never use that in my video, because that would have multiple attestation. So no, here's a better example. That Jesus had a brother named James. Oh, that's a bad example because secular history talks about it. That Jesus had a mother named Mary. Let's go with that. There's a Matthew tradition and a Luke tradition, both of which have Jesus having a mother named Mary. Those are obviously very different stories from very different sources. So I would never say that the fact that Jesus's mother's name was Mary is a for the Bible tells you so moment, even though there is no secular historian at the time saying so. Does that answer your question?
It does. I just want to clarify one thing. It just came to me when you were talking. If Paul mentioned something, and that is also in the book of Acts, would you say, for the Bible tells me so?
No, I wouldn't. I don't think Paul and Acts overlap so little. No, I wouldn't. That's a great example. No, I wouldn't. If there was something, I would love to actually try and figure out what the example there would be. But no, I wouldn't, because those are definitely, Luke is a different source than Paul's letters, especially his
Okay.
genuine letters.
Yeah, I actually appreciate that. And I do think that is very consistent of you. The example I was thinking
Okay.
of would be the Jerusalem Council, which is in Acts 15. And then
Oh,
Paul
yeah,
mentions
great
it in
example.
Galatians 2.
Great example.
Mhm.
Yep. I would agree with you that there are multiple sources. And so, yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Um,
thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Why I appreciate this back and forth, and I believe you're well intent. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Peek behind the curtain in Paulogia land.
I'm so glad you made the historical fact point, because that shit annoys the fuck out of me. Because I'm literally sitting here like, yeah, of course I assume and give the benefit of the doubt that Alexander the Great existed, because no one's told me what I have to do with my dick if I do or don't accept it. Fucking Jesus Christ. Of course there's a different standard.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And also, a lot of the time when Paul is using it, it's because whoever he's responding to is making it seem as though there's this huge body of evidence for this one thing that they're saying, but it's not the case. There's just this one thing.
It looks
that you could point to.
conspicuously the way it would look if you were doing the whole thing as a giant scam. That's sort of the problem.
Yeah. And look,